Hey, what is up everybody, Platform Disciple here with another Weird Card Wednesday that is being uploaded so late into Wednesday that you won't see it until Thursday. I'm seriously considering changing the name of the series. If anybody has any interesting ideas that are kind of catchy for a series about weird cards that is uploaded on a weekly basis but not specifically on Wednesdays, I'm all ears. Just leave your suggestion in the comments. But anyways, today we are looking at Walking Atlas, which is a common originally printed in Worldwake, and it's going to be quite obvious why this is a Weird Card Wednesday when I read through the errated text on the card, which is that it is a 2 generic artifact creature construct that has tap. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield, and it's a 1/1. The big thing that should kind of pop out to you is that it doesn't have the word artifact on it. This was in fact a misprint. And to be clear, there are different kinds of misprints. Some misprints are literal printing errors that are a problem with the printer. You might end up sometime with a card that has weird coloration or like a strange streak on it. That is a kind of misprint. But another kind of misprint is misprints that happen long before the card actually makes its way onto a printer. It's basically a typo, is that they forgot the word artifact. This is the only printing of the card in Worldwake, so there's no fixed version of this card, but there is another recent example of a misprint that I'm just going to quickly bring up because it seems relevant, which is Corpse Knight. Corpse Knight is a 2/2 creature, but there are versions of this card printed as a 2/3. That being said, Corpse Knight does have a version that is correct, unlike Walking Atlas where there's no corrected version. Aside from Corpse Knight and Walking Atlas, the next example of a kind of egregious misprint is much further back. So those are the two most recent, and Worldwake at this point is a little bit on the older side. Anyways, that basically covers what's weird about the card, but I think there's certainly more discussion to be had about it, which is cards that are creatures that allow you to put lands from your hand into play. We're gonna, for the sake of simplicity, refer to these as droppers, which are land droppers. Almost all of these, actually, well, all of the creature versions of these are green with the exception of Walking Atlas, which might be the one thing that Walking Atlas has going for it, because those green creatures either have better stat lines or a better mana cost or have additional upsides associated with them. Walking Atlas is really the dullest version of these, but it can be used in any color, which is quite noteworthy in Commander. But we're going to come back to that in a little bit. Let's talk about land droppers and how they compare to other cards that share a similar function. The ultimate goal with a card that's dropping lands from your hand is typically to increase the amount of mana you have, or at least increase the speed at which you get to that mana. Because it's worth noting that Walking Atlas doesn't increase the maximum mana available to you in the long run, because the number of times you can use Walking Atlas's ability is of course limited by the number of lands you have in your hand. It's consuming a resource, which is cards in your hand, to give you mana. If we compare that to something like Rampant Growth, which gets lands from your library, it seems quite a bit worse. Likewise, you have mana dorks like Llanowar Elves, and you have rocks like Mindstone and Felwar Stone that are going to generate mana but don't consume additional resources. So what makes Walking Atlas and other land droppers special is that they are reusable. If you are using one of these cards in your deck, your plan really ought to be to use them multiple times, because if you're not using them multiple times, you really should consider running one of these other types of cards. Now that being said, if you're outside of green, you don't have access to the same sort of mana dorks and Rampant Growth-esque effects, but you do have access to Walking Atlas, I guess, specifically, and Mana Rocks. Mana Rocks are kind of a universal staple in Commander, and that's because they are very safe. They ramp you, and they are very difficult to, or well, I shouldn't say very difficult, but they're less likely to be destroyed than creatures. Walking Atlas suffers from being a creature, it suffers from being limited by the number of lands you have in your hand, so the card is almost always worse than Mana Rocks, which is why you probably haven't seen Walking Atlas played very much at all in Commander. So let's talk about when it's actually appropriate to use Walking Atlas. Specifically, when we're looking at Walking Atlas, what makes you want to use Walking Atlas is that you have a high density of lands in your hands and are not in green, and therefore don't want to use these other cards. There aren't many examples of this, but basically what you're looking at is the Moonfolk for the most part. So you have cards like Patron of the Moon, which basically lets you play Moonfolk Tribal, and allows you to basically have the same sort of effect of land dropping from your hand on your commander. Most of the other Moonfolk feature abilities that allow you to return lands to your hand. Something like Patron of the Moon and or Walking Atlas serves to mitigate the loss that you have in terms of the number of lands you have in play by putting lands from your hand back into play. There are a couple other commanders that are Moonfolk. There is Uyo, Silent Prophet, and let's see, Miloku, the Clouded Mirror, and honorable mention, not technically a Moonfolk, but you have Soromaru, First to Dream is another commander that's returning lands to your hand. These three, if you're building a commander deck around them, or even the Moonfolk Tribal guy, Patron of the Moon, you should really consider running Walking Atlas in these decks. That being said, the issue is that the 4 commanders I just mentioned, quite honestly, are pretty bad and underwhelming. I don't think that there's anything wrong with trying to build a deck around these cards in a casual format, but you're really doing a lot of work and not getting a lot of payoff. One more card that I feel like I need to mention in reference to Walking Atlas, because it is another colorless card that is kind of a, I guess, land dropper, is Terrain Generator, which itself is a land. It allows you to pay 2 colorless and tap it to put a basic land from your hand on the battlefield tap. The biggest difference between Walking Atlas and this, obviously, is going to be that the Terrain Generator is a land, which makes it harder to get rid of. It also makes it easier to slot into your deck because you remove one of your land slots rather than one of your, I guess, actual cards that you intend to be casting. But the advantage of Walking Atlas relative to Terrain Generator is it can put non-basics and the card comes into play untapped. I would say that Terrain Generator is generally speaking better, but you do have to pay mana for its ability. It's just that Walking Atlas really runs the risk of being killed, so if putting lands from your hand into play is really a core part of your strategy, it's probably better to just have something that's a little more resilient. The last thing I will say about Walking Atlas is that it's possible that Walking Atlas's time in the spotlight hasn't occurred yet. There is always the chance that they might introduce a new legendary creature that is going to incentivize this sort of land dropper card, and right now there aren't really that many other alternatives outside of green. So if they introduce a commander that cares about getting lands out of its hand or puts lands into your hand or something like that, Walking Atlas is definitely a card you should take a look at. That card doesn't exist yet, but you never know. The other thing, of course, is that Walking Atlas could become obsolete if they print something that is better. Like Terrain Generator is getting close to making Walking Atlas obsolete, but isn't quite there because there are some very distinct differences. The card typing, the fact that you don't have to pay for it, but you never know when the card could become relevant. That just about wraps it up for today's video. I do have a card alter giveaway as usual. Today it is a 3D Goblin token. I think it turned out reasonably well. There are some things that I really like about it, like the mouth is actually hollowed out, so that's on a different layer, like the teeth are higher up than the tongue. And goblins are a really easy token to take advantage of. Everybody likes goblins, or at least I do. If you're interested in winning the card, I will have a link to that in the description. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time, everybody, peace out.